Okay, these are the boy in a striped pajama questions from chapter 13, part 2. Question 8, what complaint does Bruno make about hair list? We've heard this before, but it's repeated again on page 143. Hair list won't let us read poetry or plays. Bruno likes literature, he likes stories, but all that hair list wants them to learn is about geography and history. This time when Bruno says this, his father's there. So it gives us a chance as readers to hear what the father thinks about this. When Bruno says that history is boring, his father says is shocked that his son would think that history is boring. Let me tell you this, Bruno, it's history that got us here today. If it wasn't for history, none of us would be sitting around this table now. We'd be safely back at our table in our house in Berlin. We're correcting history here. Um, this interest in history or like of history here is kind of a code for pride, right? Pride in your national identity, pride in your heritage. And it's also that sort of dark thing that leads to the rise of the Nazis and the creation of the concentration camps. So it's not to say that history is bad, but in this context, being interested in history or liking history is sort of connected with that dark history of the Nazis. Okay, questions 9 and 10 might be a little bit confusing. What mistake does Lieutenant Kotler make in conversation? And what does Bruno's father think about people who left Germany in 1938? Hopefully I'll be able to kind of clarify this and talk you through it because it's sort of implied what's going on here, even if it's not stated directly. So the mistake that Kotler makes is he says on page 145, he left Germany some years ago. 1938, I think it was. I haven't seen him since then. And Bruno's father thinks that this is bad. He asks on page 146, what reason did he, the father, give, might I ask, for leaving Germany at the moment of her greatest glory and her most vital need when it is incumbent upon all of us to play our part in the national revival? And he says, was he tubercular? Tubercular meaning having tuberculosis. And then he says, did he go to Switzerland to take the air? During this time, it was thought that if you had a disease like tuberculosis, going to a place like Switzerland, where it's like in the mountains and there's like fresh air, that would somehow like cure you. But he's not really getting at that. He's more getting at this idea of why he would have left Germany at that exact time, 1938. World War II started in 1939. So 1938 would have just been the time that the Nazis were coming to power. It was the time that all this was sort of happening. So his father then says, well, if he didn't have tuberculosis, on page 147, one hears tales of men like this from time to time. Curious fellows, I imagine. Disturbed, some of them. Traitors, too. Cowards, too. Of course, you'll have informed your superiors of your father's views, Lieutenant Kotler. What he's implying is that the father didn't support the Nazis. He did not want to be a part of this. If his father was apparently young, so he could have potentially been drafted into the army. Regardless, everybody was sort of involved in this and what was going on in the country at the time. And his father decided he didn't want to be a part of it. So he essentially deserted. He essentially just left the country so that he wouldn't have to be involved in what the Nazis were doing. And this is very dangerous for Kotler. Even though Kotler is an officer in the German army, the fact that a family member may have been a traitor or had some views against the Nazi Party, that's dangerous for Kotler himself too, because he's related to him. So this is a kind of a tricky situation, but essentially the problem is that Kotler's father left Germany to escape the Nazis, and Kotler is potentially at risk because of this. And Bruno's father does not like traitors, does not like deserters. He can't understand why anybody would leave Germany, just as all this, in his words, great stuff was starting. Question 11, what happens when Pavel spills wine on Kotler? This is also kind of implied, and I think it relates to the previous two questions too. On 148, what happened then was both unexpected and extremely unpleasant. Skipping down a little bit, doing what he did next, even though none of them could watch, even though it made Bruno cry and Gretel grow pale. He beats him. That's what we can assume. He assaults him in some kind of way, and I think this relates to the previous questions. It's almost like Pavel. It would not have been uncommon for a Nazi German soldier to beat a prisoner in a concentration camp. That stuff would have happened all the time. But in this case, I think it's connected in a way. It's almost like Kotler's trying to prove how loyal he is. He's trying to compensate for the fact that Bruno's father questions his loyalty in some way, and it's almost like he's so angry and he's so wanting to prove that he is a good soldier and is loyal that he's willing to beat Pavel to that extent. So, in light of that, question 12, what does Bruno decide he better not do in the future? On page 149, he better not disagree with anyone anymore about anything. In fact, he would do well to keep his mouth shut and cause no chaos at all.